sat down for an incredibly powerful conversation with Pete B to talk about his history with drugs and alcohol and his recovery. In part 1 of 2, John and Pete do some bonding over their similar experiences in the military, Pete's descent into addiction, a near-death experience, and first finding Narcotics Anonymous. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We talk to Pete B. I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old-timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. However long this podcast is going to be, it probably, if I taped everything we did before where the Navy men were talking, I don't know, an extra 45 minutes, extra hour or so. Once you get those military men talking, it never ends. Steve's here, John's here, and we have a guest. Pete B is here. Pete, welcome to the Sober Friends Podcast.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So we are looking to hear a little about your experience, strength, and culture. I'm doing a little spoiler alert here that I'm assuming a little Navy story is probably coming in here because you were part of the armed services. But what brings you to the Sober Friends Podcast? I can't imagine it was a tiptoe through the tulips that brought you here.
No, it wasn't. Well, we were talking a little bit about the Navy. I was, the Navy was a great place for an alcoholic and, addict. And, I had joined the Navy to try and get some discipline in my life. And basically I was, I needed to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. And they had this 1973 nuclear power was the wave of the future. So I jumped on the bandwagon and I went through their training for that. By the time I got to my second ship, my addiction had been off the rails, but I was off. It was off and on, and I had reunited with this girl up in Connecticut that I'd been in love with before I joined the Navy, when I was in my 1 year of college, and it looked like there was some possibility there. So I showed up on my second ship with the firm resolve that I was just going to be the occasional beer drinker, and I really, because this girl, I knew that she would not truck any drug nonsense from me or heavy drinking. It just wasn't her style, and that's what had blown us up a couple years before. So that worked for about the first month. We went down to Guantanamo Bay and played war games down there, and I just drank beer out, and they had these movies outside. It was kind of a nice start. And then it just spun out of control. Before I knew it, I was that guy that they were marveling lived from port to port. I would go off and I wouldn't remember much of what happened, but I'd hear all the stories the next day. And I used to love hearing the stories about the things I did in blackouts, but now I was horrified because this was not what I wanted. Because I was deeply in love with this girl, and I knew this is not going to work. And it went on. I was on that ship for 2 years, and I had just resigned myself that this is the life I'm going to live, and I'd kind of given up on that. And I did. It's okay to talk about. We're not strictly AA stuff here, right? It's anything.
No, not at all.
I mean, at that point, I was doing a lot of drugs, and I was drinking a lot. I'd say alcohol was probably still my drug of choice, but I did a lot of drugs, and I got, I started out, I'd had a lot of friends on the ship, but slowly it kind of boiled down to this one guy was my best friend, and he was also my best connection. I was never any good at scoring drugs, but this guy always had the best drugs. And we're pulling out for a 7-month cruise to the Mediterranean. And it was 3 days after our bicentennial. It was July 7th, 1976. And I'm like, I was sweating bullets that he was going to get pulled off the ship before we go, because he had gotten busted a couple weeks before. And we were just kind of hoping whatever happened would wait until we got back from the Med. Well, the ship is actually pulling out of Norfolk Harbor, and I'm feeling like, we got it made. And they called him up on the quarterdeck. They sent a little boat out for him. And I just said, okay, I'm screwed, because I just knew that, I had gotten to the point where when I wasn't getting high or drinking, when I drank, I was almost always to blackout, and that got to be scary in foreign ports. And the drugs that I was used to have, the level of drugs I used to having, without it, I knew I was going to go through panic attacks and everything else. And I did that happened on the way over across the Atlantic Ocean, and I started like drinking heavier than I had before, and that worked until we got to Haifa, Israel, and then in Haifa, Israel, I lost about 5 hours when we were in that port. I started out, I was with some fellow sailors, and it was 11:45. I was broke. I was in the wrong part of town, clearly the wrong part of town. And I had 15 minutes to get back to the last tender out to my ship. And, I did one of those, God help me. And the next thing I know, this cab rolls up, and one of my shipmates calls out, "Bridgman, get in the cab. You're going to miss the ship." And I was just like, thank you. And of course, I think after that, I did kind of make a deal. And I said, okay, I'm not going off the ship again. And I didn't go off the ship again until our last port stop in Rota, Spain. And at that point, I just was like, but I was a raw nerve. I didn't know anything about addiction. I should have known some, because my mom got sober when I was 9 years old. Okay. And she went all in with AA. My dad went all in on Al-Anon, but I was kind of oblivious to all that. I do know that that's the year that I stopped wetting the bed. So, there was she became emotionally available. Yeah. Yeah, she became emotionally available when she got sober, and we tackled that problem together, and we overcame it, and I very much could feel her in my corner, where before she was always there, but something really happened. She came to life. You ever see the movie The Wizard of Oz, where the first half is in black and white, and then the second half is in color?
Yep.
Well, my childhood was in black and white up until the year my mom got sober in 1964, and then it was in color after that. And I mean it. That's in my memories. It's all kind of black and white. But I really felt like I started to come alive when she got sober.
This is kind of interesting that you said you were somewhat oblivious, but there was such a dramatic change in your childhood at the same time. How do you balance that out?
From my viewpoint, it wasn't all good, because I kind of thrived on the chaos of an alcoholic household, right? And that chaos kind of went away. A combination of things happened. I was the sixth of seven. I was the youngest boy, and some insight I got from my dad through the years. Like, I had a role in that family. My role was to break up the tension in the family. And so I was the practical joker. I was the mascot. I was the one. I was always entertaining. My siblings, in different ways. And then one by one, they started going off to college. They started leaving. And everything got settled down. I mean, our chaos went away, and I no longer had a role. So I actually went through a depression, when I was like 10 years old. I didn't have that insight that it was a depression then, but, I can remember, what I felt like, and that was, it wasn't good, and I felt very different.
Seems like some real Al-Anon stuff here up to this point, the role that you're putting yourself in, that you had to be the joker, break the tension.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that there, but at any rate, I was pretty much a shy kid, socially. I really had a low opinion of myself. And I've tried finding the answer in sports. I was bound and determined to fashion myself into an athlete, which made no sense because I had no coordination. But I loved sports, especially baseball. And so I hung out with the sports crowd from like sixth grade to 6th grade to 10th grade. And I became their scapegoat, and they kind of tolerated me. I actually did start to get pretty good at sports. It eventually rubbed off. I learned a lot from them, but it was just, they were merciless with me, and I just kept coming back for more because I didn't know any better.
How were they merciless?
Physically, mentally, every way that they could. I had this problem that I embraced. I embraced nonviolence because I'm squaring off to fight the school bully to honor my name when I'm in 6th grade, and I had this older sister who she comes strolling in, and she was into all hippie love, peace, and all that, and she proceeded to give me a lecture on how violence isn't the answer to anything. And I'm like, I got the whole school's gathered in a circle, fight, fight, fight. And I'm like, oh my God, this. I was terrified. I mean, I was horrified beyond belief that she's doing this. Like, I'm just trying to, get this bully off my back. And the bully, he just kind of laughed and he said, "Oh, you poor son of a gun," and he walked away.
Right.
And but what I noticed was he never bothered me after that. Yeah. So her message actually got under my skin. And I did kind of embrace this nonviolence. So when these guys would pick on me, I wouldn't fight back. I would fight back on the field. I was a force on a football field. I prided myself on how much abuse I could take. It's weird. It's a little bit masochistic like that maybe. But anyway, I was very unhappy. And the first time I drank, an older brother got married, and at his bachelor party, they let me go to it. And, after the second beer, I went into a blackout. And the next day, I was like, I'm hearing all these stories. I guess I picked a fight with his best man, who was sort of like, he was like a fullback on the football team in his college and stuff. And, and I just was like, who was that guy, And, I didn't start right away, but later when I turned 15, I got a job as a busboy in a restaurant. And the other guys would go out on a Friday or Saturday night drinking, and I'd tag along, and I'd always, they were fine. Some of them were my age, most of them were older, but I took to it like a fish to water, So for that first year, I just drank, and then I was introduced. I had another older brother that introduced me to drugs, and that was even better, So like to me, because like it eventually I became like gregarious, I didn't realize that I was so gregarious, but when I drank or got high, I was very, I got along, and the thing was, I was able to talk to people, and I wasn't all stuck in my head. And to me, that was just brilliant.
You're part of the world now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I can identify with this completely. So there's a lot here I can already identify with. So if you're listening to this and you think you maybe have a problem or you're brand new, there's probably a lot you can identify with. A lot of people who have a drug or alcohol problem have family members who have drug and alcohol problems. And I felt this way growing up. I felt very similar. I tagged along with other people. I was mercilessly picked on and bullied. And I felt like I was alive when alcohol came in. I could finally be me and be comfortable, at least during that period of time where I was high. So there's a lot to identify with.
We grew up. I mean, myself, Pete, Steve, we're all young adults of the 70s, and we were in that time where, like you said, the hippie culture, the peace and love and the drugs, peace, love, dope, back from the 60s, that was waning when we were coming of age, and it was starting to go into the disco area, right there into, the Club 54s and the cocaine and everything else was right around that time. So you still had that very heavy psychedelic drug use in there. But like you were talking about, alcohol started everything up. But in the 70s, holy crap, you name it, it was available, it was free, and nobody gave a damn. Nobody cared. It was just there and available. It was almost an expectation, that's what it was. Yeah, and the same thing in the military. I mean, I did not fare well in there because of my problems with authority, and doing crazy things with drugs. I mean, we talk about everything in this.
Where's the commonality in your story with Pete's story? I'm remembering a lot. If you go back to episode 2. At the very beginning of this podcast, that was John's story, and I remember very similar stuff. Where do you find some commonality here, military-wise?
Well, I mean, it goes back. My dad was the alcoholic in my family, so was my dad's drunk and mom's going to Al-Anon. Dad gets sober, and and the guys of the family's back together again, and everything's peachy keen, and there's no problems. It's just all a big smoke screen. My father stayed sober for 17 years before he passed. I was one of those kids that said I will never be like that. I remember stuff with Dad being My father was an air traffic controller, high stress job, and laying in the bed just drunker than hell. And my mother taking a bottle of whiskey and pouring it all over him. Says, if you love it so much, you can sleep with it too. And, I remember all these quality times growing up. And, I joined the military because all I wanted to do was I wanted to play music. And the Navy band was my vehicle to get there. But by the time I got there, I was 18 years old. I was on my own, and we had that thing of you had to get up for the job, even though we were in the military. Cocaine came into it. I mean, just as easy as booze. It's been 42 years since I've been on, so I think the statute of limitations has run out. But I was selling cocaine on a Navy base, down a Naval Training Center. All good quality stuff. So, the situations and the things are different, but the path is very similar. It's the same. I took the same path, and it was.
Yeah.
How the hell I survived some of this stuff? I have no idea how I lived. I have no idea. There's a power greater than me.
Yeah, on that after that Mediterranean cruise that I was talking about. We got back from that, and I'd been like 7 months without my drugs of choice, really without hardly even drinking, and I was so ready when we got back. And what I didn't fully understand until that cruise, and I didn't consciously understand it. It's only in reflection that I get this, how much my using was my anger control system. Because I got along to get along, as long as I could keep high, I would, even when I didn't have a whole lot of friends, I was friendly with people. I just didn't have that many people that I like get close. But in the middle of that cruise, my rages were off the chart. And I did a couple of things behind the rage that I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for, but I fortunately didn't. But when we got back from the cruise, I figured, okay, everything could go back to the way it was. It didn't. I was drinking more, doing more drugs, and the rage was fueling the rage instead of, and I had a moment, and this is the moment that I feel like my recovery journey really began. I didn't know I had this in me, but I had a murderous rage, and I was getting ready to act on it with an officer. I hated officers, okay? I just hated them.
Is this an authority thing, you think?
Well, kind of, yeah. It was maybe more of a class war kind of thing, like the officers were all dicks.
You identifying, John?
On my amends list has my commanding officer on it, and I've been looking for him. I haven't found him. I chewed out my commanding officer in front of the whole thing. I mean, everybody. It was one of those. We went down to one of the recreation areas to have a band cookout. We had the whole place. We had like 70 people in our group, and I got drunk, of course. He said something to me, and I went off. I mean, I don't know why I didn't go to the brig, but I chewed his ass bad. And I was just a third-class petty officer. He was a freaking lieutenant.
Yeah.
But I was an asshole.
Well, Well, I had an amends for the captain of my ship, that second ship. I had an amends I owed him, a big one. And every sponsor I had through the years said, "You're not ready to make that one directly. Don't do that."
Is this the murderous event?
No, that wasn't even the murderous rage.
I want to hear that. I want to hear that story. So
you will. Well, this is just something that happened on the cruise. I did something that had an impact on the man's career, and I played God, because I didn't think this guy deserved to be anything more than captain, and he was clearly bucking for admiral. And I did something that probably derailed his chances to become admiral. That's all I can really say about it. But
yeah, no, I got
it. And I got away with it. But you don't get away with anything.
No.
You guys know what I'm talking about. That you carried that with you, and
right.
And that was part of what I think a lot of my rages were sort of like trying to cover up. Trying to put people off my. But at any rate, so I'm 2 months back from this cruise, and I've been partying my head off. Me and a fellow sailor had an apartment on the beach, and I spent as little time on the ship as I could. But when I was there, every time an officer would come up to me, I'd snap, and this guy just I can't tell you what he said or what he did, but this something switched in me, and to this day it scares me that I was ready. I had a big old wrench in my hand, and I was ready. I was fully ready to start wailing on him with it, and that I would have gone to Leavenworth or who knows what would have happened, but something happened. Suddenly this calm came over me. And I just had the thought, it's not worth it, Pete. And this calm came over me, and it was almost like a sense of humor happened. I dropped the wrench. I laughed at the guy. I laughed right in his face like a madman. I walked out of the engine room. I went back. I packed up my sea bag. I walked off the quarter deck. I saluted the deputy officer, and I never looked back. I went AWOL for 2 months. I was 4 years into a 6-year hitch. You had to sign up for 6 for the nuclear power program, and I'd gone through the nuclear power program. They had told me that when I got there, had the worst score in the entire class in the entry level test they gave to test your aptitude in physics. And the captain called me into his office and said, we're going to send you back to the fleet and knock 2 years off your enlistment because you won't make it through this school. And I begged them to let me stay. I said, I can't, because my first ship was even a worse experience. And, I didn't handle ships well. Even though I loved being out at sea, I didn't handle my because I had this thing for officers, I guess. But, anyway, I begged this guy, and this guy he was like, I've never done this before. He says, but I've had sailors coming in here all week begging to get out of this program and get out of their extra 2-year enlistment, because everyone badmouthed the nuclear program on the conventional ships. We were nuke pukes, and so for a lot of these guys, they took that in. For me, it was like, I got to get through that nuclear power program because these guys are a bunch of idiots, and I'm sure there'll be better quality people that I'll deal with in the nuke program, and that was true, but I wound up acing the first real physics test like 3 weeks later. Because I stopped everything, but I just, we had periods where we could, do what we had to do to get through. And I felt like I was fighting for my life to stay in that school. And I wound up like halfway through the program, I was at the top of the class. I was acing everything because I had that tunnel vision. I just focused on this. I learned that I had a scientific awakening, if there is such a thing. Yeah. When I really got in and that physics, it amazed me how the world worked, how the world of physics worked. I just had this amazing realization of it. But then we got halfway through the school and I realized I'm going to make it. I started skating. I joined the softball team. They all liked to party, so I got back to partying. And I finished, and I was still in the upper half of the class, but just barely, I did get into trouble in the second half of the school and all that. But at any rate, so when I walked, I had worked hard to get to qualify to run a nuclear reactor on a ship, and I walked away from it, and I just followed. I felt like I was just following, this whatever it was that told me to walk. I just followed that. I stayed AWOL for 2 months, and I had been told that if I was trying to get away from the captain because I was paranoid, and I had been told before that incident that in order to get off the ship, the only way I could get off the ship was if I went AWOL for at least 30 days. So I didn't really have the balls to go AWOL for 30 days until I didn't have a choice, I knew if I stayed there, I'm going to kill somebody. And I still kind of had a little bit of that nonviolence dedication in my soul, I guess maybe that's what helped me. But I stayed AWOL for 60 days. I went out to Portland, Oregon. I lived on the guy, this officer who told me this is one officer I liked. He told me that the best place to turn yourself in was Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay. So that was my plan. And I got to San Francisco and I got picked up before I got to turn myself in. And I got thrown in the felon tank for 2 days. That was horrendous. But the shore patrol was a little busy, so they said just hang on to him until we can come get him. And they took me out there, and next to boot camp, Treasure Island was my second favorite posting in the Navy, because I learned on the second day there that that getting in good with the chaplains was a really good idea. And I could type like 60 words a minute, and they were looking for somebody to help out with their clerical duties. So they sort of took me under their wing. There's 3 chaplains, and I learned, that on a military base, a chaplain is probably the most powerful person next to the commanding officer. Because I got away with a lot in those last 2 months. But what happened is the captain there, this was 1977, and at this point, they were still trying to trim back the forces, after Vietnam. And this captain had been sort of given carte blanche to give people good, if somebody showed up there that had gone AWOL, but if they had a good record, he was given, he was giving us honorable discharges. And I was just trying to get transferred to another ship, and because I still, in the back of my mind, I still thought I might make a career of the Navy, because I liked all the other stuff aside from the officers. I liked the travel. I liked the party.
Just that little bit of a problem, the officers, right?
The military part of it,
Right. Yeah. The sense of order and discipline and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, this captain, he was a grounded pilot, and he was a bit of a maverick, and I actually liked this one, but he said, well, you got a good record. He says, I'm authorized to grant you an honorable discharge. And I said, can I think about it? Because I really hadn't been planning to get out. And I went back and talked to the chaplains about it. And the chaplains said, go, boy, go. They encouraged me to get out. They helped me, they helped me with a plan for what I was going to do when I got out. And I had it all figured out. And I went back east to say goodbye to everybody. I was gonna start my post Navy life out in California. I kind of caught that California dream, and I came back, and 2 months later I found myself in an apartment full of addicts in Norfolk. I had to use from the time I woke up until the time I fell out. I was unemployable. I was collecting unemployment, but I had always been a functional addict. I was very, very functional. I was no longer functional. And one morning I got up and I looked in the mirror, and I didn't even recognize who I was. And it scared me. And I more than anything, I was afraid that I was going to permanently lose it mentally. That was my biggest fear. I didn't care about, at that point, death would have been welcome. And it happened that fast. I mean, I felt like I was on top of the world when I left Treasure Island 2 months before. And it just, everything just went up in smoke. And when I had that moment, again, it was like one of these, I feel like that moment was a total gift. That's when, where the big book talks about staring into the abyss. That was my staring into the abyss moment.
I think you're lucky you got multiple gifts along the way that you're telling me this story, all of these gifts that you've gotten, all of these jams you got out of. And I'm just thinking about higher power moments of either we're incredibly lucky on our way to sobriety or somebody's looking out for us because there's a greater plan for us. And that's why we get sober. But it's like gift after gift after gift. And you don't take it time after time.
Yeah.
So I think if it was walking through shit and coming out smelling like a rose, because that was my superpower.
Yeah, the one, I had 4 older brothers, and the one that I always emulated the most had a real talent of that, and he always came out smelling like a rose. I wasn't as good at that as he was, but I learned that I kind of learned how to kind of get through some serious stuff. But at this point, I just was like, I was praying all the way home that something, and I got home, and I had one last night of, well, I was surprised they even let me back there because I had burnt a lot of bridges with my parents, especially my mom. I had written her a nasty letter from Treasure Island that I discovered when she passed away 10 years ago. She still had the letter in her secretary. I was like, oh my God, she's held this all this time. It was one of the worst things I ever wrote. I've written some things, but that was the worst thing I ever wrote. This letter I wrote to her, so disrespectful and everything. But she was the mom. I broke into my dad's liquor cabinet and down to spent a night down in a bottle of Jack Daniels or something like that. It was some kind of bourbon. And in the morning, I told my mom, I said, I think I have a problem. And I never drank again after that. But she was running this alcohol line for the state of New Jersey. They had a hotline that was for people with any kind of addiction problems, but primarily alcohol, and it was called Alcohol. And they were they were trained. She would train volunteers to, how to listen, listen, and they were trained in all the different kind of problems that people might have. But they were also a resource for where to send people. Like, does this one need a detox? Does this one need a rehab? Does this one need a meeting? And they would find places to send them to. And so she was. I mean, I again talk about dumb luck. To have a mom like that when I'm trying to clean up my act, right? But I was so shut out. She first thing she lined up for me was this VA rehab up above Trenton, New Jersey. And I spent 2 days there, and I said I can't stay here. And I felt like I was really serious about this, and I felt like nobody else in there was. And I was really serious about, I just needed, and I really thought, everything I had done, everything I had accomplished, I had done it through willpower. I had learned, if I didn't learn anything else in the Navy, I had learned how to exert my will to get the impossible done. And it just wasn't working for this. I actually didn't drink or do any drugs for the first 3 or 4 months. And my parents were fine me staying there as long as I wasn't doing those things. So we had a common purpose. But I got to, after the first couple of weeks, I got to where I just every single day, my goal for that day was to figure out a way to end my life. And I stayed in that place for, good. That was September that I showed up there, had my last drink, and it was finally January that I finally realized that I'm probably not going to actually go through with it. There was a surrender at that point. I wouldn't have recognized it at that time, but and the next thing I knew, I found out, and I tried going to AA meetings, but something wasn't clicking for me. I was still a little so burnt out that I just wasn't, that social thing had just been completely baked out of me, and I couldn't stand to be around people at all, and I really felt like there was no future. So just that was where I was, and I learned about a depression clinic that the VA hospital had. So I watched a lot of TV during those months, like when you're really depressed, you watch a lot of TV. And I was checking the Philadelphia Inquirer's TV guide to see what show I was going to watch, what I was going to watch the next day, because it was like 2 a.m. and they were signing off. And there was an ad in there with big black letters that said, "Are you depressed?" And I'm thinking, does Nixon need a friend? Yeah. It's like 1977, right? And well, it's actually 78 now. And I'm going through. They had 10 questions, and I answered 9 of them yes. And it said if you answered 3 or more of these yes, you may be clinically depressed. And I was like, wow, that was the first right thing I've done in months, And I called the number the next day, and it was at the University of Pennsylvania was doing this clinic. And they were already filled up, and I got a little spark of hope from that, because I said there must be a lot of depressed people in Philadelphia, So that sense that I'm not alone, I actually felt that. I got a little jump, and then the next day the doctor called me back, and he said it said on your on the notes from your phone call, it said that you're a veteran. And I said, yeah, I got out a few months ago. And he said, well, I'm going to start a similar program at the VA hospital right up the road from University of Pennsylvania. And he said, but it will be a 2-month, in you'll have to come in for 2 months. And I'm like, let me check my schedule, like
Let me see what's on TV, and I'll get back to you.
nothing lined up, and I said, when can I sign up? And I didn't know what, I thought maybe they're going to do some brain surgery or something and, try and I was game for whatever they did, but essentially they diagnosed me manic depressive. They put me on lithium for that. And one of my roommates had some kick-ass weed. And I discovered this combination, of lithium and marijuana just worked really nice. It kind of hit a sweet spot for me.
It's called creative thinking.
Well, it just happened. Again, dumb luck. But I came out of there. I had a brother-in-law that got me a job at this printing firm, and the next 2 years were kind of a stable time for me. I started going to AA meetings, and now I was getting a lot out of them. I just kept all I heard. Now, I'm sure there was more happening there than what I heard, but what I heard was don't drink and go to meetings. So I didn't drink and I went to meetings. And when I was getting high, I didn't go to meetings. I didn't need them then. But when I wasn't getting high, I was trying to control my using, so I just would get high on occasion.
Right.
Then I think another pivotal moment came in the middle of the second year of that period. My best friend up in Connecticut, all my friends in the world were in Connecticut. There was about 5 of them. And Reed was my closest friend, and he was. We had this almost. It was almost like a psychic connection. That I just felt like there were times that I felt like I talked to him when I was on a ship out at sea, and when I'd come into port, we'd continue the conversation that we had. It was really kind of like that. We were connected on a deep level, and he'd been diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. Back then, that was a death sentence, and. He was supposed to have 5 to 10 years, and it was only 2 years into his diagnosis, and him and his fiancée had traveled the country in a camper because he was just trying to see as much as he could, while he was alive, and apparently he contracted pneumonia and it killed him, but not before he brought me back from there was a welcome home party for them up at their place in Windsor, and I went up for it. I'd go up there about once a month, and that's when I would do most of my partying was when I was up there. And there was something going around. I just didn't drink. I never told them that I thought I was an alcoholic, even though I was going to meetings and stuff back home. What I had was a rare blood condition that the VA put me on medication for that I couldn't drink with. Okay, I couldn't. I don't know.
More you identify with if you think you have a problem.
I didn't have any problems with honesty or anything, though. But anyway, something was going around at the party that there was actually cocaine. And I didn't have that much experience with cocaine, but it was the middle of July, and it was all kind of, it was hard to snort it because it was getting all gummy and stuff. So someone said to eat it. So I ate it, and then I didn't feel anything, so I ate some more, and I ate too much cocaine. And I was feeling like I was getting sick, and I was going up to the restroom. And then the next thing I knew, I was on the ceiling, and I was looking down at a crowd gathered around a body. And I was just thinking, I was fascinated. I was like, this is amazing. And it didn't occur to me that it was me down there until I heard my name. And then I said, oh, and I'm just kind of like, oh, that's me down there. And what I knew was I never knew how much tension was just in my life until that moment on that ceiling, because on that ceiling, I felt no tension. It felt like the best I'd felt in my life. And and it did occur to me that this might be me checking out, and I didn't care. I wasn't suicidal at that point, but I was ambivalent between life and death. And they carried me down to this bedroom at the end of the hallway, and I stayed on the ceiling. And I was just like, okay, what's next? And next thing I know, something was drawing me down to that bedroom. And all my friends were a little freaked out because I'm non-responsive. They had me laid out on the bed, but Reed was sitting down at the foot of the bed, and he was perfectly calm. I'll probably get a little emotional here. But I knew in that moment that he brought me back. We had this connection, and we never talked about it, but we both knew it. we had this connection, and he brought me back. And he was just sitting there. He was sort of like out there with me. And I was like, okay. And I just, all I know is that this wasn't verbal or anything else, but I got this deep sense that I have a reason to live and I can't leave yet. 5 days later, I'm back home at my sister's place in New Jersey, and I get a phone call. And my friend David wants me to come back up there. I said, I was just up there last weekend. I can't come back up. And he said, Reed died. And something cracked open in me in that moment. That was, my little sister was there. And my little sister didn't even know what was going on, but she said, just let it go, Pete. She gave me permission to cry. And I couldn't remember her crying. That was something I just didn't do. And I cried hard. And something came to life for me. And I spent the next 6 months trying to figure out, I got high much more than I had been. I developed a daily opium habit. And I was just trying to figure it out because it didn't make any sense. Reed was one of the good ones. He was a giver. And I knew I wasn't. I took from life. And I took, and life never had enough for me. I was always trying to take some more. And I spent this whole winter, like, just trying to make sense of it. And one night, and I was a workaholic too. I did very well in this job. I'd gotten promoted to be the warehouse manager within a year, and I was like a workaholic. I was working like ridiculous hours, and it was just, me and the job and my apartment during the weeks, and then once a month, my friends in Connecticut. They were my only friends, and I stopped going to the meetings during that period. But one night, a doctor took me off the lithium too. This was another important thing. Towards the end of that winter, I got an infection and I almost lost my finger. And this doctor said that he asked me what I was taking, and I told him lithium, and he said, I need to take you off that so you can fight. I don't know if he was a quack or not, but I knew I liked feeling my feelings again, and I just was like, I decided then I'm going to stay off the lithium. And this moment probably wouldn't have happened but for that. But I'm sitting at my dining room table, and I was playing this baseball game that I still like to play. But I was playing this baseball game that I played. I'd gotten high, and I just got this overwhelming sense of loneliness just came over me. And I actually called out, God, I'm alone. And right after that, I looked over on my kitchen counter, and there's this big book of AA that I had never opened. I didn't read back in those days. I didn't like to read. But for some reason, I picked that book up, and I started reading it. And it was like that guy, whoever wrote that, and I now know Bill Wilson was, it was just like he reached right into my soul. And I didn't feel alone. I hadn't felt that way since my friend died. And I felt like, and that's the first time I understood anything about alcoholism, because I'd just gone to meetings and I just was like sitting there. I'd sit through the meeting. I didn't make friends in AA during those 2 years. I just was like, I just thought this is the deal. You just go to meetings and don't drink. Well, I went back looking for what was in that book, because I said I missed it. I figured I didn't went to all those meetings, but I didn't know what was going on, and I wasn't quite getting that sense of that I got from reading the book until this one meeting. I was in this AA clubhouse, and this kid spoke, and he made some references in his story that he didn't say he did drugs, but if you were somebody who did more than drink, you knew what he was talking about. And I went up to him afterwards, and I said, I really, you said a few things there, and he kind of laughed, and he said, oh, you must be an addict. And I was offended.
Yeah, right.
I was like, no, I'm not. I just realized that I'm an alcoholic. Come on, don't let's not pop one.
Right.
But I really liked talking to this guy, and he told me about. I'd never heard of NA before that. I'd never heard of them. And he said you ought to try NA. I was like, what's that? He said Narcotics Anonymous. I said I don't do narcotics. And he laughed. He said it's not. He said it's a bad name. He said, but they're for anything. So he got me when he said there's a lot of young people there, And there wasn't many young people in AA where I was at. I was used to them, I was used to these old guys saying, I probably spilled more than you drank. And I'd look at them and I'd smile and I'd think, you have no idea where I've been. I did suck up a lot of the condescension, but it was just at that point, I was like on a mission, and so I went to this NA meeting and it was a bunch of teenagers. I'm a 25-year-old disabled vet, and all these teenagers, and I'm like, I'm just sitting there in this meeting thinking, there's no way, this is a mistake. This is a youth group. This isn't like AA at all. And I was, they had a break and I was getting a cup of coffee at the break, and I was definitely going to leave. I wasn't going to go back in, and I never would have done the doors of it again, because they were just a bunch of teenagers acting like teenagers, as far as I was concerned. That's all I saw. Well, this one kid walked out and chatted me up a little bit. I didn't know. I could have sworn he looked like he was 18. He had just turned 20. He was one of the older ones there. And I didn't know that the kid had 3 years clean. Because he didn't lead with that. He was very friendly to me. And he just chatting with him, I had that same feeling that I had when I was talking to that other kid at the AA clubhouse. So I wound up walking back into the meeting, and a funny thing happened. While I was walking back into the meeting, again, this is a God thing, I think. I had the thought, I'd heard someone say that I stopped growing emotionally the day I started using. And that thought just hit me just as I walked back into this room full of teenagers, and I look around and I said, well, I started drinking when I was 15. I started using when I was 16. I said, I'm right here. And for whatever, that thought allowed me to open up my mind, open up my heart. And the second half of that meeting, I spent the whole meeting thinking, yeah, me too. Me too. Everything these kids said was like brilliant. I was like trying to figure out, how did you learn how to talk like that? Because they were talking from their heart. And I was like, it blew me away. And I walked out of the meeting, and I there was something, I was only about a month and a half off the lithium, so I wasn't used to having emotions, right? And so whenever I had a weird emotion, I'd spend a little time trying to figure out, what is that? And I'm driving home from this place, and I only lived about a mile from this meeting. I'm driving home, and I'm trying to figure it out, and I get to my apartment, I'm opening the door, and I'm like, and I hadn't felt hope in a long time. Even when life started to, get better and I got the job and everything, I was just kind of going through I still didn't understand what life was all about or what I was doing here, And I just had to go back the next day and see, if they had a meeting the next night. And that was a step meeting. And they had the AA 12 and 12. And I mean, these kids were studying it. They were reading. They'd read a paragraph, and then it'd go around the room, and everyone would talk about what that paragraph meant to them. And I was like, wow. I was like, finally, I find these people are taking this stuff seriously. And I knew right then I'm in the right place. I'm feeling hope.
That's part 1 of 2, and we have so much more to come next week. In part 2, when Steve booked Pete, we didn't know that Pete was an early pioneer in Narcotics Anonymous, and you'll find out how Pete was part of the group that created the very first Narcotics Anonymous literature. I'm so excited we were able to capture this bit of history. Find out more about Pete's story in Narcotics Anonymous and the rest of his recovery next week on the Sober Friends podcast. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod.